Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Breer, and welcome to episode 56 of the 11FS FinTech Insider Breakfast Show. In this show, we bring you the best and the brightest from around the fintech and banking landscape every single weekday, straight into your homes at 8:30 BST, here live on LinkedIn. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Nick Cook, who is the Director of Innovation, Strategy and Competition Division at the FCA. On this morning's show, what we're going to be doing is talking about how the FCA's new sandbox is being set up, the G20 Tech Sprint, that's coming up very shortly, and how they're supporting the industry through this very troublesome crisis. Nick, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, David. How are you?
Not bad. I mean, life is a bit weird. I'm not going to lie, but I mean, last time me and you chatted, we were at the FCA's offices, actually, weren't we? So
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, a lot has changed since then. For starters, we wouldn't be allowed in the office right now, would we? But I mean, how are you guys coping with everything through this? I mean, let's maybe start with your background. Let's start with a little bit about what you guys do. Obviously, we've got a bit of an international audience here as well. So maybe talk a little bit about the FCA and talk about your role specifically.
Sure, happy to do so. So the FCA is the one of the core financial regulators in the UK. Its primary aim is to make financial markets work well so that consumers can get a fair deal. And it has three statutory objectives that are given to it within legislation. The first is about securing appropriate degree of protection for consumers. So a very common objective for many regulators around the world. The second is to promote and enhance the integrity of the UK financial system. And the third, a more unusual objective actually for a financial regulator, is to promote effective competition in the interests of consumers. And as I say, that's quite an unusual third objective for a financial markets regulator. Give you a sense of size and scale. So we authorize and supervise in the region of 60,000 firms and a little bit over 140,000 approved persons. And we cover a broad range of sectors and topics, everything from financial advice through securities and wholesale markets, mortgage products, pensions, consumer credit, but also things like financial crime. So a very broad and diverse remit. Within the FCA, I lead the innovation division. And we kind of have two main areas of focus. First, externally, we lead a lot of the FCA's work with the fintech and regtech sectors. And we have a series of services, tools and approaches that we use in order to support innovators in the UK markets. And then the second part of the division's work is more inward looking, and it's looking really at how do we take some of the best that we see in the technology and the data analytics space from within the regtech and the fintech sectors, and how do we apply that learning to ourselves to make us a more digitally native, digitally enabled, data-driven organization. So it's a mixed role that sits across kind of an external agenda and then an internal transformation.
I mean, it's really interesting because, as you say, I mean that third pillar there, the competition one, has been such a catalyst, I'd say. We've talked about it a lot on the show before, and in many other guises as well. But it's been such a catalyst, I'd say, for not just here in the UK, the changing of how the fintech scene has really sort of emerged since the last crisis, really. But globally, I think the impact of the decision to have that third mandate is really significant. You know, we're seeing different regulators now taking on different parts of that to really change the dynamics within their financial ecosystem that they have. So, I mean, it's been fascinating, really. I mean, you've been at the heart of this for quite a long time, but I mean, from the financial crisis in 2008 to the crisis that we have today, I mean, last time there was an amazing amount of things that came out of it that were really positive for the ecosystem. I think there's probably going to be lots of things that I think will come out of this one as well. But maybe sticking with you then, Nick, for a bit, like how have you been through this? Obviously, with everything that's happening with COVID, moving to remote working. I mean, you've got two young children the same age as mine, haven't you? So how's working from home working out?
There are goods and bads, I think. I'll be honest. I think the organisation transitioned to full remote working more seamlessly than I expected. Actually, we weren't necessarily geared up to operate in that manner. But I think the transition worked pretty well, actually. I think for me personally, I'm juggling like you are, homeschooling and trying to hold down full-time work and do that as best I can. And likewise, my wife is doing the same. And so I think I've gone through the spectrum of emotions around it. You know, I've had periods of guilt where I think I'm not a very good parent and I'm not a very good colleague right now. And then other times where I'm a bit more kind and generous to myself during this phase. But on the whole, I've had more positives. You know, I've spent more time with my kids. I've got a newfound respect and understanding of actually what does the education system for young children look like. You know, what is the role of teachers? I have a completely different opinion and respect now. I've spent a lot more quality time with my family. I'm traveling a lot less. You know, these are really big upsides. But I miss the team. I really miss. You know, it's lovely to see people on video, but I love the informal aspects of being in a team, the bumping into someone, the catching up just very briefly. I miss that side of it. And I think the thing that I've probably found hardest to replicate and replace is how do you get the kind of creative brainstorming working when you're not in a room and you can't just chuck ideas up on a wall and move around the space. That's been a little bit hard to replicate. But on the whole, I think it's been a largely positive experience. But I'm lucky. I'm in a much more comfortable environment and space than many people, and I'm acutely aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it is definitely a difficult period. I mean, I was saying to you just before we went live. I mean, I'm just so tired. Like, and actually, it's so strange that I'm traveling so less. I'm commuting, 20 meters, 30 meters, so actually, but the fact that I was in bed by like 9:30 last night is just quite bizarre. So like the world is definitely, I think that it must be all of the stresses and the strains of all of the things that we're seeing on TV and the changes. So I mean, hopefully we get back to normal. And like I say, I think there's definitely something about getting energy from your team, isn't there? But I think, I mean, you guys have made some lots of announcements during this period. It's definitely, the transition definitely hasn't slowed you guys down in terms of the things that are kind of coming through. I mean, particularly on the digital sandbox coming out of your area. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the things that are coming out and actually what it is that you guys are doing for this next stage?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the organization at large has been very, very busy, as you say, putting out a lot of changes to policies and requirements, a lot of it engaging with industry and with Treasury, particularly to try and help consumers, business and the economy through this very difficult period. And as you say, there's a lot on our website about different changes and tweaks that we've made to try and facilitate that. Not easy, actually, probably worth just adding that. Yeah. In terms of the digital sandbox, I mean, it was something we'd been thinking about pre-crisis. It largely flowed from, I guess, kind of 2 or 3 main areas. Firstly, we have a regulatory sandbox where institutions, regulated and unregulated, can test new products, new business models, new services on real life consumers in a controlled environment. But what we were seeing was some of the applicants into that wanted forms of assistance that we couldn't provide, predominantly data. They wanted some kind of either real world or very high quality synthetic data in order to support that test. We also saw similar asks coming out the back of our hackathons, our tech sprints, where teams would have collaborated and built very early stage prototypes over a couple of days, and they wanted to take them further. So they wanted continued access to the cloud environments, the collaboration tools, and the data assets again, in order to develop those solutions further. So there were those 2 asks that we already had. And then thirdly, we had an ask from international regulators around the world who wanted themselves to run hackathons and similar ideation and collaboration events and just didn't know what the technical infrastructure needed to look like in order to run those sorts of events. So we kicked around this thought around a more permanent digital testing environment for UK and international financial services. We thought it would be potentially particularly useful for the reg tech sector, which we have seen stumble a little bit in terms of deployment and adoption in the UK. But we also thought it would be a broader public good into the international community to provide some sort of testing environment. So we we somewhat accelerated our plans. So we've gone out with a very initial straw man of some of the features that we think a digital sandbox, as we've called it, would include. And I've mentioned some of them already. They are things like the data assets. It may include things like an API catalog, or some method by which APIs can be exposed from vendors into the market. It might also, over time, I think, morph to include some sort of vendor marketplace option as well, although we'd have to be very careful what role we would play in that side of it. So at this point in time, really what we've done is we've gone out and said, here are some features that we think might be relevant. We've explained the rationale and the background to it. And really, we're very, very open to expressions of interest in terms of helping us design and think this thing through and scope it out. But also particularly any innovators who need new innovation services from a regulator, particularly during this COVID period. If there are tools or facilitations or helps they need from us, we'd love to hear that, and we can design and build appropriate parts of the digital sandbox to try and meet that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because, again, I mean, that as a point of principle, the fact that you guys are so open to hearing suggestions or listening to people and evolving those things, and you actually do that. You know, it's not just a mailbox nobody's looking at. These are the things that, I mean, just last couple of weeks, the open call for responses for around open finance. I mean, 11FS and Plaid put a piece in about that, and it's interesting to be in a situation where you have a regulator that is listening to the market, is trying to increase its understanding from a technological perspective, from a risk perspective. I mean, things like you say, like the RegTech scene. I mean, the RegTech scene has struggled a little bit because of, like you say, access to representative data that actually they can then build models on. So responding to that and doing something about it moves the whole scene forward. So I mean, it's really interesting to see. I mean, as I said a second ago as well, we're sort of seeing globally people sort of emulate a lot of the things that you guys are doing. I mean, that must be a good sort of affirmation that you guys are doing a great job. I think only this week we had DFS, didn't we, over in New York, sort of coming out with something very similar, you know, an evolved version of really where you guys started. So, I mean, what's the next steps then with that sandbox? When do applications open up?
So, I mean, it's open for expressions now.
Okay.
We've had some already who've put their hat in the ring, but on both sides, those that want to test in some sort of new environment and those that want to help us design and build it. I think the next step that we think is probably most necessary is once we have some of the use cases and the test scope that entities have put forward, we're going to have to start procuring, sourcing, and or developing the data assets that are needed for those tests. So we think we might run something along the lines of a data focused hackathon or sprint towards the back end of July. With a view to, at the end of the summer, being able to start actually facilitating testing. But it kind of depends, to be honest, David, on two things. One, the community that comes together to try and help us develop this proposition. And secondly, the complexity of the use cases that the innovators actually want to test in the environment will to some extent determine some of the timelines. But we're open now, and we're already hearing a lot of expressions and a lot of support and enthusiasm.
I think the thing I always take from, I mean, the work that I've seen you guys do, the thing I always really take from it is it's not exploration just for understanding. I mean, the work that you did with some of the tech sprints previously, you're really focused on the end impact that these things have. You know, when we've previously talked about, the impact that, fraud and money laundering has at the end of this. We're talking about billions of pounds being moved around the planet, but it's not really about the money. It's about what people are doing with the money and the impact that has, slavery, or, I mean, the impact that you guys have by making changes at this point in the process. The end result of that is changing people's lives, which I think, again, is the focus is in the right place in terms of the impact that you guys are trying to have.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think you're right. There are some massive societal challenges that then resonate through financial markets, and AML, financial crime, terrorism, and slavery are a very obvious example thereof. But I think you're right. We've tried to focus the innovation events and the hackathons and things around areas where we see either very high costs, which are creating barriers to entry for new players, so that harms competition, or where we're seeing just very suboptimal outcomes, like you say, in terms of preventing nefarious criminals from enjoying their ill-gotten gains.
Indeed. And obviously, I mean, in this period as well, unfortunately, there's always people who look for bad opportunity in crises, isn't there? So there's definitely sort of people who are looking to sort of take advantage of this time. So the more support we can give people, the better, really. A few interesting questions over on LinkedIn sort of related to this. So
Sure.
Will the sandbox focus on B2C propositions and data, or are you looking at covering B2B needs as well?
No, so there is no narrowing of scope just to B2C. I think B2B is absolutely in scope as well. I mean, to be honest, I would think of RegTech more as a B2B market primarily. Yeah. And it was to some extent the RegTech subsector of the technology environment that first made us think quite deeply about this digital sandbox proposition. So yeah, it's not just B2C, it would be B2B as well.
Yeah,
I mean, and I think, sorry, just to add to that, I think one of the things that I think we might look at is not just to B2B and B2C in specific use cases, but also more broadly digital enablement. So what is necessary? Let's pick things like digital identity or new methods of exchanging data between institutions. Those kind of things that are perhaps B2B2B or B2many. I think we'll be looking at those bits and pieces as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting world. I mean, as we progressively move to digital being the mainstay, it is the default. Then actually the concept of always on regulation and everything that comes with that, and to your point, where you guys are in, it's no longer a and that's where I think like the impact that your division has on the entirety of the FCA, I think is really interesting, because always on regulation as opposed to regulation post event becomes such an interesting thing to kind of look at, doesn't it? I think the concept of that, I think, will be really, really impactful. But I mean, how else are you guys kind of supporting people? Because I know I've seen the everything that you've done with an innovation hub and a few other things that have kind of come through. Obviously, everything that's happening with G20 and Tech Sprint. So there's a lot happening, but maybe focus on the innovation hub to start with.
Sure. So I mean, the innovation hub's been up and running a few years now. It's added services over time, but the main services or the main offers into the market are something we call direct support, which is a place where innovators can come and seek regulatory clarity on their business models and their propositions, and get some sense of what the regulatory expectations would be if they were to launch into the market. So we've been offering that service for a number of years now, and we've had several hundred entities that have engaged with us through that service. Linked to that is the regulatory sandbox. We briefly mentioned it earlier, which is a curated and managed space for testing of new propositions in the real economy. It is not a synthetic environment. It's not a virtual test. It is a real world test on real world consumers under real world conditions. Again, that's been very, very busy over the past few years. We've had in the order of about 100 to 120 tests that have completed or are in the process of completion. Great place for us to learn about new technologies, new innovations, but also a fantastic place for innovators to test their model before bringing it to market at scale and launching. And then we've got a further piece of the puzzle that focuses on robo-advice. We call it the advice unit, really looking at how to plug advice gaps, particularly in the UK, where a group of consumers need advice perhaps, but don't really have the financial backing to pay for face-to-face professional advice. Yeah. So there's a bit of a gap there, and so robo-advice offerings come into our advice unit for some steer and some clarity. So we've got all of that, but then as you mentioned, a big part of our work is international. So sharing what we're learning in those different services, sharing what we think about these new technologies, sharing what we think about in terms of technologies that can modernize regulators themselves, and branching out into international networks to share that knowledge and to learn from others and different experiences around the world. So we also chair what's called the Global Financial Innovation Network, a really diverse group now of slightly over 50 organizations across every continent, who come together to look at a number of things, one of which is facilitating international testing of certain products and services, but also a lot of collaboration around RegTech and supervisory technology as well. So we've got a real mix of bits and pieces and services there. And then I don't want to speak for too long, but just a couple of others to mention. We've been working on what we call digital regulatory reporting for a period of time now, a collaborative effort with the Bank of England and a number of regulated firms. And at its core, what we're looking at there is, can you codify law, basically? Can you express regulation as machine readable and machine executable code? And if you can, what does that facilitate in terms of new architectures for data exchange and movement around the industry and between industry and ourselves? So a real mix of work. It's a very interesting work. And as you say, the G20 Tech Sprint is something that we're interested in and helping with as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's an amazing array of, like, say, you roll back to 2010, none of these things kind of existed. I mean, in the last 10 years, the advancements that we've seen in terms of, the regulators' engagement with the communities, engagement with the FCA, not just the FCA, but like you say, the Bank of England and everything that really comes from that. It really feels like one community sort of moving the agenda forward, which is fantastic. A comment from David Riley. How do I get involved with the Innovation Hub? Where do people kind of find out a little bit more information about that, Nick?
So there's lots on our website. If you type FCA Innovate into any good search engine, then you'll find the home pages. Drop us a line. If you're not sure what kind of support you need, you can still just come in through Innovate and we'll direct you into the right area. So there's lots on the website about eligibility criteria, the way we work, what you can expect from us, and all the contact details that you will need on there.
So you touched slightly on the G20 Tech Sprint. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's rapidly approaching, isn't it? And you guys always look at a big topic for those things. What's the focus this time?
Yeah, so this isn't one that we've put together. So just to give cues where they should be. For those that are not familiar, a tech sprint is broadly a regulatory hackathon, a regulator convened hackathon on normally a long-standing intractable problem that potentially requires new technologies and new collaborations and creativity to solve it. So short, sharp events to try and address those issues. We've run about 7 of these now, and back in March we published a bit of a kind of lessons learned and a how-to guide on how to run these to try and help other regulators do the same. But in parallel, the Saudi authorities, in their role as G20 presidents for the year ahead, identified RegTech as one of their priority topics and themes. And they asked the FSB, the Financial Stability Board, BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, to scope out across international regulators a series of problem statements and use cases in the kind of RegTech, subtech space. They've since then also engaged colleagues in Singapore at the Monetary Authority, and a group that may not be known to many listeners, the RegTech for Regulators Accelerator Program, which is a not-for-profit, Gates and Omidyar funded not-for-profit that's been trying to stimulate development of supervisory technology in emerging markets. So this group's come together. They've pulled a series of use cases and problem statements together. They focus broadly on regulatory reporting modernizations, surveillance modernizations, particularly in the crypto space, and legal and safe data sharing and exchange to enable things like improved financial crime detection. So they've got all these use cases have been put together. It's an open event. They've been accepting applications for a few weeks. And then my understanding is that over the summer, they will shortlist and then facilitate a virtual sprint using what is called APIX, which is the Monetary Authority of Singapore's collaboration and API platform. And then the intention is to try and whittle down the development and the teams to a series of winners, which I think will be announced at the Singapore FinTech Festival in the autumn, all being well. Looks really interesting. It's the first time we've seen another group of regulators execute a hackathon on this kind of scale. So we're really keen to see how it works. It'll be the first one that's fully virtual as well. So it'll be interesting to see how much they managed to achieve the community and collaborative spirit that you briefly mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But it looks like a really interesting proposition, and we're keen to see how it develops.
Yeah, I mean, and many of these problems, like you say, it's not it's strange. I mean, the regulators are not in competition with one another. You guys are collaborating globally because, I mean, many of the problems that you're looking to address here are global problems. So,
right.
I think you guys have before said a lot. The kind of network of networks here. A network of criminals, it requires a network of regulators to resolve it, doesn't it? So it's interesting to see that collaboration being taken between you guys as much as between the local industries or local economy, if that makes sense. But
absolutely, yeah.
I mean, for me, it comes back to, I mean, that as we were talking about at the top of it, your sort of third objective, that competition mandate. Maybe if we just touch back on again that, because I think it's so important to everything that you guys do. And I mean, not wanting to put sort of words in your mouth, but I think it's so important to why we are where we are now in terms of the sort of flourishing of fintech and the changes that we're seeing in financial services. Because I think many people, when they look at that competition mandate, think it's just about letting fintech players in and allowing new people to come into the market. But the impact that new people have in the market is to change the perspectives of the big incumbent organizations as well. So this isn't just about allowing new things to happen. It's about big traditional incumbent organizations with tens of millions of customers really having to level up their thinking, level up, and the whole market then moves forward. I think it is probably one of the most important decisions that were made in the last 15 years, I guess, in terms of the changes that we've really seen. So, I mean, that must have changed really your time at the FCA as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you put it very eloquently, and I couldn't agree more. I think the impact that innovators have on incumbents is very material. The ability for innovators to service underserved segments and groups of the community, very important. I think we've seen more creativity as a result of those competitive threats as well. But yeah, it has changed materially. I've been at the FCA 12 years, and actually the organization's remit, not just in terms of competition objective, but in terms of the markets it covers and the sectors it covers, has grown very substantially in those 12 or 13 years. But I think the competition mandate and the fact that it is an equal objective to the other two, it doesn't sit subservient. Yeah. So when we consider our interventions and we consider our strategy as an organization, we have to have competition in mind as well. And I think the organization has done a decent job of pushing forward that agenda. But I think I think to some extent, our desire to continue to build on that is exactly why things like the digital sandbox feel like something we ought to explore, because there are certain parts of the sector, as we referenced, particularly RegTech, that we feel could go even further. I mean, I think there's some things that we could do to try and help support and stimulate that. But yeah, it's been a very significant period of significant change since I've been at the organisation.
Yeah, and for me, it's not just the fact that you've done it; it's the way in which you've actually made it happen. I mean, you've taken a startup approach to changing how regulation is done in the UK. You've started something small, you've gained success with it, you've built up around that, the trust that's earned within the organization, within the broader framework, and built on that success. And it's, I mean, it's a good example, I think, even to startups about how to approach making major change from an industry perspective actually happen. But all right, guys, unfortunately though, it's top of the hour. I'm sure there's lots of questions that we didn't get to. So Nick, jump over on LinkedIn and take a look at some of the questions that we couldn't get to. And if you've got any thoughts that you can share, that would be great. We probably should let everybody get on with their days though. So at this point, Nick, where can people learn a little bit more about you and obviously the work that you're doing at the FCA?
So fca.org.uk will have lots of information. You can catch up with me on LinkedIn as well, of course. And if you type in FCA Innovate into a search engine, you'll get a lot of the information about the topics we've been covering today. But David, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem at all. Good luck with homeschooling. I hope it goes
Likewise.
really, really well.
You too.
All right, guys, it's all we have for you today. We'll be back with you tomorrow, though, where I've got Justin Fitzpatrick, who is the CEO over at Dudil. We're going to be talking about everything that's happening in the fintech ecosystem and actually looking really at where their development is actually going. A really, really interesting company. Justin's a great guy as well, so should be a really good chat. All right, guys, that's all we have for you today. See you same time, same place tomorrow. Have a great day. Stay safe. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.